Hello, Bob here. Now, I have trouble using words like branding and rebranding non-ironically. However, the fact is that my podcast, The Wright Show, is about to undergo some rebranding, and so is Blogging Heads TV, the YouTube channel that the video version of the show appears on. So I thought I'd give you a heads up. Starting in late June, the YouTube channel will be called Non-Zero, and so will the podcast. Now, technically, the podcast will be called Robert Wright's Non-Zero, so you'll find it under R in any alphabetical list of podcasts. Meanwhile, my Substack newsletter's name will not change. And since its name is already Non-Zero, that means that we are witnessing a case of brand unification. 3 brands are becoming one. My content is becoming less confusing in at least this one sense. So, what does this mean for you? Not that much. If you already subscribe to the YouTube channel or to the Wright Show podcast, you'll be automatically subscribed to the rebranded version. And by the way, if you're not already subscribed to both, you should take remedial action immediately. And make sure you're subscribed to the Non-Zero newsletter too. Now, I have to say, I will be sad to see the name Blogging Heads fade into the background. I started the Blogging Heads TV website in 2005, along with Mickey Kaus and Greg Dingle, and I will always be proud of our vast and rich archives, which, by the way, will still be available at www.bloggingheads.tv. And actually, for the time being, new content will be posted there in addition to on YouTube, so the site won't immediately turn into just some kind of museum. Speaking of Mickey Kaus, the Friday podcast I do with him will still be in the Wright Show. That is the Non-Zero podcast feed. And the paywalled after podcast I do with him each Friday will still be available at patreon.com/Parrot Room, and also available to paid subscribers of the Non-Zero newsletter. And I very much recommend the Parrot Room. So I close with this guidance. If you see something called Non-Zero and you don't already subscribe to it, subscribe to it. And if you want to rate and review and click the like button and stuff like that, so much the better. Thanks, and I will see you soon in Non-Zero land. Hi, Mickey.
Hey, Bob.
She is.
Who's the woman?
The person. She's like you.
Not a woman, Bob.
Oh, no, I guessed wrong. It looks like, are you sure it's not a woman? You sure it's not somebody who's...
This is the famous Leave Britney Alone video.
Well, who is that person that I mistook for a woman?
Here. Now this person is crying. This is the famous video of a Britney Spears fan saying people should leave Britney alone.
Not famous enough for my purposes.
You never seen that?
No, I'm pretty much stay out of the Britney ecosystem.
This is one of the golden oldies. This is about 8 years old, my guess is. But anyway.
Oh, I probably knew it one time.
So I had this flash of why is everybody hating on Biden? Okay, he's he's harmless now. He's a zombie. He's an old man whose domestic agenda is stalled. The major domestic problem is inflation. He can't do anything about that. He's already fucked that up. It's out of the bag. It's up to the Federal Reserve. It's not his job anymore. How much damage can he do? I mean, let the guy do his doddering old thing and don't vote for him again. My God. But why the hate? Why the hate? That's what I don't understand.
Well, are you talking about Republican hate or Democrat? I mean,
the public turned on Biden when the Afghanistan withdrawal went bad, and they've never let up. They don't like him. They don't like anything he does.
Speaking as a Democrat, the reason that I'm critical of him is I don't want him to run again. I want people to realize he's a horrible candidate. He's not doing a great job for my money, but he's beyond that. He's just a horrible candidate. I want the world to know. And by the way, one of the latest sources of outrage is pretty egregious. I mean, during the campaign, he promised that he would make Saudi Arabia a pariah state as it should be. And, he's going and sucking up to Mohammed bin Salman.
There's one wrinkle on that.
What is the wrinkle?
They will now support a ceasefire in Yemen, which seems to be a big concession that he got from them, which might save a lot of lives.
Huge concession. Hey, Joe, I've got another idea. Why don't you just say, we'll quit giving you weapons, which is, by the way, another thing he did not deliver on in the campaign. He said, well, I'll stop. Well, after in the early presidency, he said, we are no longer delivering any offensive weapons to Saudi Arabia. And some of us said, wait a second, pretty blurry line between offensive and defensive, right? And a government accountability office report just came out establishing that the Biden administration has still not developed a clear definition of what they mean by defensive and offensive for purposes of regulating the weapons sent to Saudi Arabia. But look, if he wants them to cease and desist in Yemen, he's got plenty of leverage. No more military support. Why are we such chickens? It's just ridiculous.
Foreign policy is the one area where he still can do good or damage. I mean, that's he and so in general, I mean, with Ukraine, we should be. I mean, he's basically done okay, hasn't he? He's been. We should support his efforts. No, you don't think so? Okay.
I mean, first of all, he made no serious effort to avoid the war diplomatically. Secondly, you said that there's nothing you can do about inflation. Leave it to the Fed. Well, actually, the longer the war goes on, the worse it is for inflation. That's one thing, especially if you can imagine some degree of lessening of the sanctions in the wake of the war, which may or may not be the case.
That's a good point that nobody makes.
Well, it's true. And what is his position on the war? At least publicly, his position is, we'll just keep giving you weapons, and you persist in this completely futile quest to rid every inch of your land of Russians.
Don't you understand? We're going to humiliate Putin, Bob, and that will send a message to the Chinese to lay off Taiwan. Remember those days 2 weeks ago when the neocons were riding high and we were going to humiliate Putin?
Yeah, I forgot about that. But things aren't, it's looking more than ever like if we're not having a talk with Ukraine about a peace settlement, we have to have a talk with him. There's a good piece by this guy, Daniel Davis, former lieutenant colonel in the U.S. Army, and we summarize it in today's Non-Zero newsletter. But he's been saying for a while, like, you don't understand. I mean, Russia does have the capacity to destroy Ukraine, and if they want, and Ukraine needs to rethink its strategy pronto if it wants to hang on to like Kyiv, Odessa, and so on. It's not going to wind up winning the war in the Donbass.
I thought their hope was to degrade Russia enough in the Donbass so they don't have the strength to take the rest of Ukraine.
It may be. Look, I'm not an expert on this stuff. This is his argument. That may be their plan. But see, what I worry is that what their plan is actually subordinate to is what what image they think they need to project to keep getting Western weapons, as opposed to, the kind of intrinsic value of the plan.
Well, I assume that but their message now is we're in deep trouble. We need weapons immediately, and that's different from we're routing the Russians. So that's suddenly, at least more realistic.
Yeah, it seems to be realistic. I mean, Davis's argument for some time has been that they need to fall back and establish, just beyond the Donbass, defensible lines. Right. And he knows more about this stuff than I do. Right. But you're right. No, we got a huge ask now. What they want, we've sent them about 100 howitzers. They want 1,000, and so on down the line.
But domestically, Biden has been reduced to the stage where in 1988, remember that famous outburst where he said, I have a higher IQ than you do. I graduated in the top of my law school class. I got 3 degrees.
But that was all true, wasn't it, Mickey?
Up to a point, Bob. It was
only regular viewers and listeners know that it was not true. And Mickey is
four of the 5 claims were bullshit, and but now he's just spewing bullshit. Whatever happens, he says the idea that the rescue plan caused inflation is bizarre. Why we have a lower inflation rate than the rest of the industrial world? No, we don't. We have one of the higher inflation rates. It's just he's reduced to the old Biden of just bullshitting, and I just think it's hard to hate that. It's sort of pathetic.
I don't hate him. I don't dislike him. He seems a very likable person to me. I don't dislike him the way I do some politicians. But he cannot be allowed to run again.
I hold out the possibility that there is an unpleasant side to him that involves a certain amount of corruption involving his son Hunter, and expecting to get his beak wet as the head of the family.
It's not impossible.
But he's not heeding our advice from last week, at least my advice, which is if you're going to pivot after the election, pivot now before the election. If after the election Klain is going to leave and you're going to have a new broom in the White House, bring on the new broom now. I mean, what do you have to lose?
You would think, but I don't know. He's got a tough. Regardless of how responsible he is or isn't for inflation, this is a tough thing for him to beat. I mean, this is polls show it's overwhelmingly the main issue on the mind of.
Yeah, but Reagan was in the same position. The Fed cracked down about the same point in his term, right?
No, but he turned the corner. He turned the corner before the '84 election. I think it was the worst, as I recall.
Right. Biden has 2.5 years before the next election.
Well, I was thinking about the midterm first.
The midterms, he's not going to. No, that's not going to make it. But
it's possible. But remember, with Reagan, we were already in trouble when he assumed office. I think wasn't the trouble beginning because the big trigger for the inflation, the oil issue, had happened during Carter's.
Well, sure, Carter was the misery index, and
right.
The inflation was quite high, yes.
I think we'd be lucky to have a turnaround within a couple of years, a clear turnaround within a couple of years, but I don't know.
The weird thing that's happening is the Democrats are not doing that badly in the recent Senate polls. Fetterman is ahead by 8 points in the latest poll in Pennsylvania. Maybe the stroke is he had a stroke. Maybe that's getting him some sympathy.
Is he out there in public, or is he still recuperating?
Not yet. He's talking on Zoom. Herschel Walker is tied. Tied in Georgia, and every day we discover he has a new child.
What is it, 3 now? Which would
it's either 2 or 4. I haven't figured out what the latest is.
I heard 3 at one point. These are kids we didn't know about, and apparently one of his little sermons is about the importance of responsible fatherhood and having a father around the house and so on.
Well, he's clearly the father of the year in some respects.
In sheer output, yeah.
In volume.
Yeah.
But yeah. Anyway, so he has a good chance of losing. And in North Carolina, they were also behind. The Republicans were also behind. So
what, could the Democrats conceivably hang on to the Senate?
Yes, they could.
That would be pretty amazing. That would make me happy. So
wouldn't make me happy, but as you know, I'm a 2-issue voter. The other thing that's interesting to me is the immigration issue, which was very salient about 6 months ago, is now, even though the border is being overrun like never before, we just had a record for the month of May. 1 million people a year are just being let into the country, at least. And those are the people that we know are being let in. They're the other people who are just sneaking in. The borders are porous like never before. And it is a big issue to voters, but not as big as you'd think. It's like a second-tier issue, like abortion and crime, but it's not like inflation. Inflation is like way above it. And I think 2 things are happening. One thing is Without photos, it's not a huge issue. In other words, when there were photos of thousands and thousands of Haitians camped under that bridge in Texas on the news every night, it became a big, big issue. And Mayorkas has been smart enough that he puts the people on buses in the middle of the night, ships them out all across the country, and there are no photos of masked people at the border, although the media could get them, but the media is complicit, and they're not going to publicize it unless they have to, because they're on Biden's side and they're on pro-immigration side. A friend of mine says, if you're in Texas, you know it's happening. It's in all the local papers. It's just the national press doesn't take the clips that they could get from the local press in Texas and put together a story.
Now, did you say 1 million a year coming in non-illegally?
Correct.
I guess you could call that legally, couldn't you? You mean on the southern border?
Yes.
Not from everywhere? And
they're on the southern border, and they're from all sorts of countries, not mainly from, I think it's only half from, Latin America, from Mexico and Central America. They're coming from all over the world. Biden has basically invited anybody to take their shot, come and apply for asylum, and they'll probably get in. And the world is taking him up on that offer, and he's letting many 100,000 a month basically in.
So the 1 million a year, it's basically asylum cases?
Correct.
So
basically,
some of them may not stay. I mean,
no, they'll all stay. Even if they lose their cases, they stay.
So some of them will stay illegally.
It takes them years to adjudicate the case, and then if they lose, they don't get deported, so they stay. Yeah, it's not the end of the world. They're waiting for the next amnesty, which who knows when that'll be.
But to some extent, isn't this kind of what the current law requires us to do?
I don't think so. It wasn't happening under Trump. He could use the Title 42 more vigorously. He's not only using it at half strength. They've loosened the asylum criteria so they could enforce that.
So Biden has made it easier.
If you're worried about gang violence or getting beaten by your husband, that's not traditionally grounds for seeking political asylum. You have to be persecuted because you're, a Uyghur, or because you're a Democrat, or because you're, for some reason. And the third thing is, we don't have to release them into the country pending their cases. You could hold them either in Mexico. That program was very, very effective. The Remain in Mexico program had, I think, almost 100,000 people in it at one point. Anyway, tens of thousands of people were told, yes, we'll hear your asylum case, but wait in Mexico until you hear. And when that happens, they don't come because they don't want to wait in Mexico. They want to get in here. Or we could detain them. And, Obama had built capacity to detain people, and that got shut down by the courts. So, but you could attempt to detain more people so that they wait out their, wait for the hearing in detention, not by working in the United States. So there are a bunch of things that Biden could do that he's not doing.
So, and you're saying he did actually, like, on paper, loosened the requirements?
Oh yeah, there was a Sessions put through a rule called "In the Matter of A.B.," which basically said we're tightening the asylum criteria, and Mayorkas reversed that. The glitch in what I'm saying is you have to get the administrative judges to get tougher. They traditionally, there's this initial determination of do you have reasonable, I'm using the wrong word, but reasonable cause to fear being persecuted if you go back, and they grant 70% of those, mm-hmm. and Steve Miller was trying to get it down to 60 or 50%. And that's very tough because the asylum judges tend to be liberals. They have a lot of independence, some of them. So it was hard to do. So there's that glitch. Even if you change the criteria, the judges are human beings and they may, grant it anyway.
Mhm. Well, if it's what you say, I don't necessarily love it. But I would say if it's what you say, they should be able to cut a campaign ad that if Biden runs for re-election, will not help him among some voters, at least. I don't know.
Yeah, well, I'm sure they will cut that ad. But the other thing, I mean, you could negotiate with Mexico to get them to crack down, and apparently Governor Abbott did that in Texas.
Yeah,
he sort of talk about violations of the Logan Act. I mean, he shut down the truck traffic into Texas and extracted a promise from the Mexicans to take firmer action. And apparently the Mexicans are actually blocking the latest caravan. So Abbott has had some success. And Trump had huge success. He threatened to put tariffs on Mexico and scared them into blocking. And so there are a whole bunch of things. But even that is better than amnesty. Even Biden letting in as many people as he can for 2 years is not going to permanently change the face of America the way an amnesty would permanently change the face of America. And he's not going to get through an amnesty. So, how much damage can he do?
Well, I was about to say before you mentioned Mexico that it kind of makes you think that maybe he should have, with this Summit of the Americas thing that America hosted, this kind of, I guess, more or less annual thing that this year is in America. Biden should have, rather than do his little virtue signaling by excluding, whoever, Venezuela, Cuba, and thus setting off a big controversy and uproar and pissing off Mexico. He should have just said, hey, if you're in the Americas, show up and we'll talk, and maybe we can talk about some actual issues. As it is, several leaders, including the president of Mexico, boycotted it.
Why don't they virtue signal by saying people shouldn't be in the United Nations? Obviously, when it comes to the UN, they have a realistic view of who gets to come representing various countries where the leader isn't democratically chosen.
You're saying, why don't they say a bunch of countries shouldn't be allowed in the UN?
Well, a country is a country for UN purposes. If you're
I was about to say that.
If you're Maduro in Nicaragua,
right?
You represent Nicaragua, you get a seat at the UN. Why shouldn't that also apply to this Summit of the Americas?
I agree. I mean,
and if you're an inveterate virtue signaler, why don't we go crazy with the virtue signaling and say, kick Nicaragua out of the UN?
Right. I see what you mean. Yeah, go one way or the other. Well, look, I mean, obviously, I guess the one positive development I see lately is just becoming clearer and clearer to more people that this whole framing, and it's the central theme of his foreign policy, global struggle between democracy and autocracy, is a big mistake. I was listening to this super blobby podcast, and all of these like blobheads were agreeing like this is not working out. And it's like the LA summit, the Saudi sucking up to, this was what they were talking about, is how embarrassing it is that he's going over and sucking up to MBS. But there's a good piece by Stephen Wertheim in The Atlantic about making a point that, granted, I made in my newsletter 2 months ago, but still, good that these things eventually make their way into The Atlantic, that it's a bad framing for the Ukraine war to say, oh, this is about the struggle with autocracy. No, it's better to frame it as the problem is it's a violation of the sovereignty of Ukraine.
So you're saying the blob has turned against the Blinken frame of making it democracy versus autocracy?
You're hearing more skepticism about it. I'm not sure everyone's gotten the picture like this, this podcast with a different one, Tommy Vietor and Ben Rhodes, Pod Save the World. Again, they think they're not part of the blob, but I have bad news for them. Of course, Ben Rhodes coined the term, but it's like you hear them complaining about every kind of particular manifestation of this war on autocracy thing. They complain about the Summit of the Americas. They complain about us not changing policy on Cuba, and they lament how egregiously hypocritical it now looks for him to suck up to MBS. But if you go back and listen to that podcast right before Biden took power, they were just looking forward to this global war against autocracy. These two guys, they had Tony Blinken on and sucked up to him as he told them he was going to declare war on autocracy. So some of these guys, I don't think those two guys yet, the nickel has dropped yet, that they were just wrong about this. But there is more and more skepticism.
The hypocrisy about Cuba was built in. They never had any intention of waging a war against autocracy in Cuba, right?
Who didn't?
The blobbers. I mean, Tommy Vietor and Ben Rhodes were not about to wage a war against autocracy in Cuba in order not to be hypocritical.
Well, right. I mean, they would have favored, loosening the policy toward Cuba, at least to the point that it was at in the Obama administration, which they were part of. But I mean, they just hadn't really thought it through. That's the whole thing about, this thing comes from two sides. You got the neocon democracy promotion, and then you got the progressive version of it. And I think most of progressive, it's just an abstraction. They just think they have to say something idealistic.
Do you think it was affected by Trump? In other words, if they could wage war against autocracy, that let them merge domestic policy and foreign policy, because Trump is an autocrat. We're waging war against autocracy at home, and we're waging war against autocracy abroad. So it's just a big war against autocracy across the board.
I think at that level, yes. And also the specific Russia angle, another piece we summarized in the Non-Zero newsletter today is this piece in Jacobin, where this guy, it's one of these foreign names that I wouldn't do a good job of remembering. Maybe I'll find it before this is over, but he's a well-known writer, Jacobin. He just, basically blames Hillary for ginning up Russiagate, and in the process, turning a bunch of liberals into cold warriors, into Russia-phobes. I think that's right. I think that's right.
That has been amazing to watch. I agree. It's one of the stunning things of the past year.
You could see it happening during the Trump years. You could see exactly the way it was working and the way some people were working it, like trying to make it happen.
Yeah. I think we should talk about the January 6th hearings. They could be being more effective than I expected because maybe they are behind the slight uptick of the Democrats in the polls and major uptick in the Senate polls.
Is there an uptick? I didn't know.
Well, if you look at the generic ballot, it's ticked a little up toward the Democrats. They're still behind. The most recent poll had it tied. Well, a tie goes to the Republicans, but the Republicans are always a couple points behind. So if they're tied, that means they're a couple points ahead. But yeah, there's a bit of slight uptick, and I expected to be a complete nothing. And there, the film was pretty effective. There have been details that I didn't know about that have been sort of shocking. I was surprised. First, I was surprised that Pence didn't refuse the car to leave the Capitol because he thought that was part of the plot, was to get him out of the Capitol so he couldn't fulfill his duty.
I want ammo, not a ride. Oh no, that's somebody else.
Yeah, and the second thing is he was worried that they were going to kill him.
Wouldn't you be?
Well, but the Secret Service comes. I mean, that's like a plot out of Hollywood. The Secret Service comes with a car, and Pence told the Secret Serviceman, "I trust you, but you're not driving the car. I don't trust the guy who's driving the car."
Wait,
he said that, yeah. Apparently,
but he didn't mean that the driver was going to be on a plot, did he?
I assumed that that's what he meant. Maybe our listeners can correct us, but maybe I'm taking.
So wait, it wasn't an act of courage. It was an
parallax view of things.
So it wasn't. I mean, the way they're playing it is no. I do not want the world to see the vice president, running for his life. I will stay here and fight to the death. But you're saying it wasn't that. It was more like, I'm afraid of getting in a car.
It was all those things, I think.
Well, wait.
I mean, there was no point where you had to choose among them.
Which would have taken more courage, though. I mean, given the way he was sizing things up, which did he think?
Oh yeah, no, it does diminish.
The higher risk
it diminishes the courage.
Yeah,
a little, but it's still pretty courageous. I mean,
Look, he's certainly in my, for my money coming out looking good.
The chances that the car we're going to take him to visit Jimmy Hoffa's body in New Jersey are pretty slim.
By the way, I always take such opportunities to recommend Jack Goldsmith's book, In Hoffa's Shadow, I think is the name. Great book.
Amazing.
But I digress.
It's just an amazing coincidence.
What is?
That this prominent law professor's stepfather was.
Yeah, his father was Jimmy. The father who raised him, not his biological father, was his stepfather was Jimmy Hoffa's right-hand man, or he was I don't know what the best term was, but he was by his side.
And a suspect in the murder, I think.
Yeah, but I think not. It is. There's good reason to think that he should no longer be a suspect. At one point, and not even for the murder itself, but the idea would be that he abetted the murder, because they still don't know exactly how Hoffa disappeared in the first place. But it seems not credible anymore that his stepfather was involved.
Yeah. On January 6th, first I recommend Byron York's column today, because it's a very good explanation of why exactly Eastman's plan was crazy. In other words, if the problem with the normal criticism of Eastman's plan is, if there really were a dispute among the states and they sent two slates of electors, the vice president couldn't just be an automatic, yes, we accept these electors, because they're two slates. They're two competing slates. So he has to choose, or somebody has to choose. He has to throw it to the Congress to choose, or something has to happen. It's a defect in the Constitution and the way we run elections. But in this case, there really weren't two slates of electors from any of the states. Some of the Republican parties said, we're going to set up a backup slate of electors in case we win this election. But they didn't win the election. The courts said they'd lost the election. So, and the governor sent the official slate. So Eastman really had no leg to stand on at all. It's not just a case of, oh, well, he'd lose in the Supreme Court. It was a complete fake case. And York makes that point very clear in a way that might even convince some diehard Trumpists. The second thing is I did a little more research on, was there a rally planned at the Capitol? In other words, did Trump send the people from the ellipse marching toward the Capitol? And they were, the only thing they could do there was, ad hoc, figure out what to do, attack the Capitol or do. And that is not the case. There actually was a rally plan. They got a permit. There was the whole plan was to have another rally at the Capitol. Unfortunately, it was in front of the Supreme Court, which is behind the Capitol. In other words, so the marchers from the ellipse would have to walk all the way around the Capitol to the back end of the Capitol, where they would have their rally. And the rally never happened, because by the time the marchers reached there, the assault on the Capitol was happening. And obviously, they stuck around to see the main show. They didn't go around to hear, Diamond and Silk give their rap on the Supreme Court steps. So if you look at the videos of the Supreme Court, the ones that I found, there weren't a whole lot of people there. Not many people made it there, but there was a rally. The second thing in my favor, and there's something that's
can we back up? I lapsed for a second. You're saying this was a separate rally? There were two rallies, or
the same people planned two or three rallies. I think there were three rallies actually.
After the speech.
There was the speech on the ellipse. There was another rally in Freedom Plaza, which is that hideous square in front of 14th Street there. And there was in front of the old post office, I think. And then there was another rally planned later. And it was scheduled for one, and Trump ran over. So he didn't. They didn't. Okay. The one thing was overtaken by events.
And what is the importance of this?
The importance is that when Trump said go and peacefully protest, there actually was a peaceful protest planned. So it wasn't insane that he would think they would peacefully protest. It wasn't that they had nothing to do except be a violent mob. The other thing is the initial attack by the Proud Boys on the first sort of perimeter line of defense, where they just had a line of like 12 cops. There was not a lot of crowd behind it. Okay, there were like maybe a few hundred people, but they weren't really participating. It was really a very small mob that overcame the first line of defense.
Mm-hmm.
So the idea that the Trump set these people who provided the shock troops that overtook the Capitol is wrong. The Proud Boys left early. They got there early. Trump hadn't started talking when they arrived. So Trump couldn't have incited them in his speech because they'd attacked before. But then there was a second battle on the steps of the Capitol, higher up, near the door, that lasted about at least an hour. And by that fight, the mob from the ellipse had arrived. So your point that there was a big crowd from the ellipse that provided the oomph that overcame the police, that is plausible for the second battle at the top. And there's a video in the January 6th hearing where a cop says, "Look at these people. This is hopeless. We're outnumbered. Just take a look at this. We're fucked."
Yeah.
So you have a point about the second one.
I haven't been paying close attention to these, although I got to say, I did just turn on I was listening to the radio and it was on NPR. They're pretty engrossing. The part I was listening to was actually captivating. But it sounds like one kind of slightly more damning thing for Trump that's come out is how clear it is, like how many people like on his staff and close to him were texting him and like using all means of communication to tell him, this is a problem. You gotta do things that turn down the volume. All of this before he tweets. Mike Pence didn't have the courage to do the right thing. So it's like, it just seems it's a little harder for him to plead something that would have been implausible to begin with, which is that, gosh, he had no clue that maybe a responsible president would try to quell this a little bit.
But they've shown that after the fact, he did nothing to quell the violence for a long time, and he may have even fanned the flames a bit. What they have not shown was that he planned the violence, that beforehand he was in cahoots with Steve Bannon or somebody, or the Proud Boys or somebody, and said, I want you to go storm the Capitol. It's possible that was true, but but that's sort of essential to some of their claims, and they haven't proved that at all. They have enough to impeach him on after the riot stuff if they wanted to, but we knew that before.
Yeah. As for whether it'll move the needle, I would assume, they said the total viewing audience is 20 million, which seems to me not that much, given how many people are in the country, given how many networks are covering it. But the Fox has started showing it, right? Which is an interesting thing. Fox News.
I didn't know that.
Oh, they have apparently, and I was going to ask you why, but if you have a theory as to why, but if you
well, Murdoch has clearly made a command decision that Trump must go because the New York Post had this editorial, which was pretty good, pretty strong, saying, "Look, Trump's living in the past. Let him stay there." It did have this. It had sort of. It got very fuzzy after that. It said, "Well, there are many other equally appealing conservative candidates like Nikki Haley." Oh no! All of a sudden, Trump has fresh appeal.
We are groaning for different reasons, you and me, right now. But
we are.
Well, I'm thinking foreign policy. You're probably thinking.
I'm thinking foreign policy too.
Okay.
The point is that Murdoch sort of holds hope in this editorial that there'll be a reversion to the old establishment conservatism of Richard Hawes and, I guess Mitch McConnell and Paul Ryan, and that's not going to happen. So,
did you mean Richard Hawes when you threw him in? The head of the CFR.
Yeah, isn't he the Pope of the blob?
Well, I mean, you might say that by virtue of being by virtue of his job, yes. I mean, he would claim that he's a realist, and if you were a true realist, you wouldn't be anywhere near the heart of the blob. But yeah, I think he's actually not a true realist, and he is at the heart of the blob.
I mean, he's a nice guy. He's a smart guy.
He's smart.
He's friends with friends of mine. He's a golfing buddy with friends of mine.
Oh, is he a golfer?
I think so, yes.
Speaking of golf.
There you go. You could have a summit.
Yeah.
You could have a 19th hole summit.
Mm-hmm.
Settle this hash once and for all. No, he hasn't been as bad. His writings have not been as bad as others.
As some others.
But the point is they're not going to revert back to pre-Trump Republicanism. A Bush, the simple thing, there's not going to be a Bush, revival in the Republican Party.
No, that's true. So is there a chance that Pence will run for president?
So I think, what else do you have to do? Of course he's going to run.
Well, why doesn't anybody talk about that? All they talk about is DeSantis.
Because they know that he has no chance.
He has no chance at all? And why is that?
No. I don't know, because he's sort of a wooden character who's the only basis among evangelicals, and he doesn't have that much to say. He's a slick debater because he's a radio guy, but you don't really know who he is, and you don't know what he stands for, really.
Will his presence in the race hurt Trump?
He's not Trumpy.
Will his presence hurt Trump or help
It'll
Trump?
help Trump because it'll divide the field. Peggy Noonan made 2 points today, which were good. One goes to she says the January 6th hearings, the word is getting out, even though only 20 million watched. I don't know about that, but it's plausible. And the second thing is, the important thing is that the field not get divided against Trump, that the unseen powers have to pick an opponent and have it head-to-head, Trump versus DeSantis, because Trump might lose that if it's Trump versus Pence and Cotton and DeSantis and, who knows who else, and Nikki Haley and a bunch of other people. Well, Trump will win with 35% of the vote. So I think Pence helps Trump by running.
So who are you betting on right now as the Republican nominee?
Well, John Ellis wrote a pretty good column where he says, and he doesn't want this to happen, but he thinks you'd have to bet on Trump. And that's certainly who you'd have to bet on, but I think the odds are getting closer to 50-50.
Him and DeSantis.
Yeah, and I think DeSantis is by far the strongest opponent, although I like Tom Cotton, except on foreign policy.
Oh, God.
But I don't think...
There is something so wrong with that guy.
Keep in mind, Cotton did not go along with the January 6th. He did not go along with...
That's true.
He was very strong from the outset that you have to let the electors vote and be done with it. So that's to his credit. And he didn't... The temptation to cover your ass and fuzz is great, right?
Yeah. And so you figure DeSantis has a better chance of winning the general than Trump?
Yes, much better.
And Trump's is below 50%. Of course, we don't know who the Democratic candidate is. But Trump versus Biden, I can't believe that Trump wouldn't have a real shot against Biden.
He certainly has a shot, yeah.
I'd give him more than 50%.
And DeSantis would have to somehow harness the energy of Trump people. You have to inherit the Trump mantle, and if Trump doesn't want to give it to him, that's a big problem. And if Trump wants to run as an independent, that's an even bigger problem.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, there are things that have to happen. DeSantis has to be a Trumper. He can't be an anti-Trump.
Well, he has managed to not be anti-Trump, right? I mean, right. He's very careful about that.
And his affect is somewhat Trumpy. So he could do that, but if Trump says don't go with this man, then there are loyal Trumpists who won't go with him. So.
Well, Trump is exactly the kind who would come out of a tough nomination race saying that, right?
Unfortunately, you're right.
And is DeSantis in his heart, is he a Trumpist? I mean, just philosophically, ideologically.
I don't know.
But he's claiming to be one?
Yes, I don't know what his views are on trade. I don't really know what his in immigration. I think he's been made sort of a lot of Trumpy noises.
Mm-hmm.
But once there's not that political imperative to be Trumpy, will he revert back to something else? I don't think there's anything in his past to indicate it, but the answer is I don't know.
By the way, speaking of trade and things, whether Biden can or can't do things about inflation, one thing he could do is drop some of the Trump tariffs on Chinese goods, and there are rumors that he's actually thinking about that. Right? Have you heard that?
And right. I've read articles that say this wouldn't have much effect, and I don't think he wants, for strategic reasons, he doesn't want to do that. Because at this point, he will do anything to waste time until the election, where it looks like he's doing something. I think you have to see everything as a desperate play to get, 5 days of good news coverage where it looks like he's taking action against inflation. It's reached the pathetic desperation level.
Yeah.
I think I think he has reduced tariffs on solar panels, I believe. So
okay.
Start. Yeah. There was a good article by somebody, it was either David Dian or Matt Stoller, pointing out that, I think it was Stoller, and I hadn't realized this, is that the supply chain, not only is it subject to the various vagaries of if there's an epidemic in China shuts down, there's no supply, blah, blah, blah. If there's a war somewhere else, the supply chain's in Ukraine, we get a lot of stuff from Ukraine, that supply chain is fucked. But it creates like choke points where there are only 3 shippers, and the 3 shippers can collude and raise prices. So it creates the perfect sort of oligopoly situation that would tend to lead to higher prices. It's another, I think the equation of globalism equals inflation is one that somebody should really drive home and hasn't.
Well,
or you think it's already been driven home?
But it can't. I mean, I take your point that it may be that the system naturally settles into a place where there's too much kind of concentration of power, so to speak. In other words, these specific points where if something bad happens there for one reason or another, there's a bottleneck there.
Right.
You got a big problem. That could be the case, but if you ask yourself, well, how much would things cost if there were no trade? It would be more, okay? I mean, I don't think there's much doubt about that. If you just look at the other, what is the opposite of globalization? Zero trade, okay? And I assure you that a lot of things would be more expensive.
Even when robots are, even when all production is done by robots, it could be in China or the United States, and the robots are built by 3D printers, which could be in China or the United States. Seems to me then everything could be onshore.
When that paradise arrives and none of us have any useful work to do.
When cheap labor becomes a minor factor in the equation.
You would think. I mean, that's not the only reason that the cost of production varies in different countries, but yeah, you would think that as labor as a share of production cost drops, one source of the difference between like us and China would, that makes sense. But we do know that right now there are meaningful differences in the cost of production in different countries. And if you say we can't buy any goods from the places where production is cheap, that raises prices. And if you say there's no trade, that's what you're saying.
Right. That would be the argument.
That just was the argument, yes.
No, but I mean, at least the anti-globalists have some argument that says, well, yes, you lead to lower prices until a war happens, and then they're countervailing forces. So it blunts.
Well, that's good. That's because there is trade disruption. Yeah.
I do note that Adidas started this factory. One reason you might onshore production is because it's more important to be right on top of trends in the home country.
Mm-hmm.
And even though I think foreign factories are pretty much on top of U.S. trends. Adidas started these 2 factories that eliminated the supply chain. They did everything in the country. I think they were in Germany, and they've now shut them down. So that experiment failed for some reason.
You
You
remember when the Adidas revolution hit, when suddenly there were these leather foreign athletic shoes in America?
Well, I was in high school.
Yeah, well, that's what I say.
I
So
still
you're-
wear those shoes. Stan Smiths.
You have, do they still make Stan Smiths?
They still make them. There's a pair sitting right over there.
Oh my God.
They now make them of recycled material, so there's no leather involved.
You're kidding.
It's all plastic.
That's funny
So
because in junior high, I mean, let me just say, Mickey, I was not from the kind of family that would have bought me those leather shoes that I so coveted. And I wore Converse All-Stars. But I will say that in junior high, the kids who wore they would have been fake Adidas. You remember there was a term, fake Adidas, in junior high.
Oh, really?
Sometimes they weren't very convincing fakes. They had 4 stripes instead of 3. But anyway, some of them were not leather. That was like the lowest version of fake Adidas.
Well, now they figured out a way to charge $90 for plastic shoes.
For fake Adidas?
If you show up at my gym wearing Stan Smiths, they laugh at you to play basketball.
Yeah.
And I say, I'm not that good. It doesn't make a difference whether I'm wearing Stan Smiths or the best basketball shoe in the world. I'm still going to play the same.
Do you still play basketball?
When I can. I mean, I haven't
court.
I haven't since COVID.
Half court.
Full court sort of knocks me out. Yeah. Half court. I play half court.
God, I haven't played in years. Years. It's just like, oh, well. We'll talk about the consequences in the Parrot Room. Speaking of which, we are about at that moment where we start winding it down. We're at, I don't know, close to 50 minutes.
Okay.
I will say one. Let me say one more thing about the Ukraine war, just to follow up on how hard it's going to be for Ukraine to turn the tide in a big way. Like actually regain the entire Donbass and stuff. I hadn't realized kind of until this week that they face a very fundamental problem. Like, I had thought, well, wow, these howitzers are coming in, these multiple MLRS from the U.S. are coming in. It's going to really beef up their armamentarium or whatever the term is, their arsenal. But it turns out they're running out of ammunition for the Soviet era weapons,
right.
and there's nowhere in the whole world to get it because the Eastern European nations have given them what they have pretty much. I don't think Russia's going to help them out. So they're there are
no factories that make them in the Eastern European nations.
I wondered about that, but everybody's talking as if not. It may be that at one point Ukraine made them, but I think the Russians know where those factories are. They've already destroyed some of those factories with missiles. Some weapons factories in Ukraine.
I mean, doesn't every Arab terrorist militia use Kalashnikovs, and are they out of ammunition
but I'm talking
too?
about artillery and stuff.
Oh, okay.
I
thought they were losing bullets. I thought they were running out of bullets too.
Well, they may be. I doubt. That's not what I've heard though. It's the artillery, the heavy weapons. The problem is they got a ton of these things that are suddenly going to be worthless. And this is the main thing they're relying on right now.
Right.
And these things are just going to suddenly you're looking at a worthless asset. As I understand it, that's a problem.
That's how we won World War II.
Is it?
Well, there's that famous story of we would send a tank over the hill in Italy, and the Germans would destroy it. We'd send a tank, the Germans would destroy it, and they ran out of
destroyers before we ran
out of tanks.
Yeah. Rope-a-dope.
Good point. So what do I have things to talk about?
Okay, why don't you do that?
Fewer than I thought.
You mean in the Parrot Room or here?
In the Parrot Room.
Okay, why don't you? I'll write this down. What are they?
In addition to exciting news about the child tax credit, which I know you're dying.
Oh yeah.
Dying to hear. Romney unveiled his big plan. But I'm still paranoid, Bob. You'll be happy to know.
You think he doesn't really mean it?
Who knows what Romney means?
Yeah.
He seems to really mean it. And he's getting a lot of good press from really meaning it, not on the left, but from think tanks. Anyway, there's some Epstein news.
Oh,
there's a continuation of our Epstein argument from last week.
I was worrying that we were doing too much revisiting of old terrain on the Epstein argument front, but you don't think so?
I think the question of was Epstein the only one, or are there hundreds of other Epsteins out there we just don't know about, is an interesting question. How decadent is our ruling elite? Are they? Is Epstein just one sex ring that just got busted, and so they've joined other sex rings, or was he sui generis?
Hard to believe there's anything quite like him, but okay. But anyway, you say there's Epstein news. That's good. What else?
I have a Dave Weigel angle that nobody has.
Boy, that's quite a feat.
I know. I think it's a huge feat. There was a very good article about how Stanford has eliminated all fun at college.
I saw that. I didn't really read it. I actually skimmed it. But this is true. Yeah, I could chime in on that.
People don't like us talking about articles we only skim.
Some people don't. You never know how representative the complaining commenters are of commenters at large. You just or viewers and listeners at large. You never know. Maybe we should ignore them.
And I had I read, Bob. I not only read your recent article on this engineer at Google who claims that their AI has reached consciousness, but you said there's another longer article, and you sort of dared readers to reach the end of it, and I reached the end of it. So I have things I want to bring up about your views of consciousness.
You mean the part of my piece that was behind the paywall, or the Time piece I wrote in 1996?
No, it was you referred to a long meaning of life piece on Richard Dawkins.
You read that?
I read that, Bob.
Oh, you should seek help. I can help. I'll help.
I took a deep dive into the mind of Bob.
That's deep. Because you know what? Look, I don't want to. But that is my one chance for greatness. If the genius of that argument is recognized, Mickey, I'm telling you, you're going to be happy. You can say you know me.
Well, we can talk about that, Bob.
Happy.
I'm not
you seem unpersuaded.
Well, I didn't. I had questions that I'm not convinced that I need some convincing.
Yeah, no, this is about whether. No, anyway, on the one hand, I want to maintain my humility. On the other hand, I want to say I have solved the consciousness problem.
Okay, we'll see about that. And I take the stance of I'm a rube who knows nothing about the history of the debate, and so I have questions. Now unfortunately that seems to be all that I have, except that there's some new insight into the dating habits of Richard Spencer, the Heil Trump guy.
Yeah.
But that's like a one-liner. But
is her first name Eva?
No, it's and he's not gay. Who? Shocking. I was convinced he was gay.
That's commonly the case.
How can you run around in leather with a tiki torch and not be gay? Anyway, okay.
But you say this about a lot of people, Mickey. I mean, not the tiki torch part, but you just, as we discussed in the Parrot Room, your gaydar is pretty sensitive.
I perhaps have a lot of false positives, yes.
So wait, Spencer, Eva. This consciousness thing could go on a while. I may talk a little about the U.S. Open and its connection to this Saudi golf thing. U.S. Open's going on now, high drama. I will, of course, bring up another New York Times headline that I will say signals the demise of the ideal of objective journalism. Got one of those. There's a ton of interesting comments worth. For example, one commenter notes that I let pass without inquiry. You're saying that you were once in an event where security was provided by the Proud Boys. And this person rightly asked, Bob, why did you say, what was that event? We'll find out in the Parrot Room. Kurt Gödel, in what sense was he crazy? This is the incompleteness theorem guy. We have a commenter who's actually an expert on that, it turns out. And so on. So we'll talk about stuff in the Parrot Room at patreon.com/Parrot Room. People should join us. We will start taping that within minutes of finishing this. It'll be posted later tonight. Anything else, Mickey?
No, I am not a robot.
No, I am not a robot.
Me either. And we will see you there.